Hello, everyone. My name is Alec Crouthamel, and welcome back to episode 2 of the What's Choppin' podcast as part of the Big Banter Sports Network. Be sure to follow us on all social media at Big Banter Sports as we work to bring you the best and most elite Big Ten content out there. Be sure to follow us at the What's Choppin' podcast at What's Choppin' Pod on all kinds of social media: Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and be sure to follow us on all that, and we'll keep the content train going. And before we really get started, I'd say if you're watching on YouTube, you may see a little bit of a scuff setup, and that's because I'm actually on vacation right now. So I definitely chose an interesting week to be away from home, especially given some of the events that have occurred throughout the past week or so, which we'll get to, maybe not in today's episode, but in the later episodes that you'll see later on this week, depending on when this episode comes out. But anyways, secondly, gotta say, sorry for the long absence. It's been about 3 weeks or so since the last episode. Life has been, life recently. I have an internship. I got a bunch of stuff going on, and it kind of unfortunately fell to the wayside, but I am guaranteeing that you'll get 3 episodes this week, and we'll keep working at it, especially with the season coming up. There's tons of new content, especially with that season opener less than a month away. We got training camp going on. You'll hear more about that later on. Realignment stuff, you hear more about that later on as well. But for now, this is the second episode, so let's get straight into it. Rutgers has a starting quarterback, and his name, I'm sure everyone knows by now. I'm a bit behind on the news, but named Gavin Wimsatt, the redshirt sophomore out of Owensboro, Kentucky, was named the starter prior to Big Ten Media Day, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And it is an interesting decision, as Rutgers has not, especially under Greg Schiano, has not named a starting quarterback this early in a pretty long time. I know in 2021, Noah Vedral was named the starter for the opener. I believe it was right before training camp, but still very early on. I believe it was, at least under Schiano, 2010 was the last time. So it's been a very long time. So Gavin Wimsatt named the starter, beat out Evan Simon for that job. Both apparently were pretty close in the spring, but Wimsatt did just enough to get that job, as he's been working with Schiano, a new offensive coordinator, Kirk Shiraka, to make sure that this offense has a successful year. So we're going to go over what Gavin Wimsatt brings to the Rutgers offense. So first, we're going to talk about his strengths. And his main strengths are his arm talent, his mobility, and his out-of-structure playmaking. So first, we'll talk about his arm talent. He has an electric arm, can make all the throws, put the ball anywhere. And that could also lead to some downsides, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, he has tremendous arm talent, really gets some great velocity on the ball, and can really work the deep game if he's accurate, which, again, we'll get to in a little bit. His mobility, he was billed as a dual-threat quarterback coming out of high school, and unfortunately, we haven't really seen that as much as we would have liked to in his time as a Scarlet Knight. He unfortunately had a lower body injury down the stretch last year, so that really sapped a lot of his confidence and the coaching staff's confidence in using him in the run game for fear of re-injuring that leg. So hopefully fully recovered and ready to go. We will see more of that this year, especially since this is a Rutgers offense that kind of needs to get going in order for the team overall to succeed. Maximizing the strengths of your quarterback is a great way to bring success on the offensive end. And I guess going along with that mobility, the out-of-structure playmaking is another strength of his, where things break down in the pocket. He has to escape and get away, and he has shown the ability to do that on several occasions. I mean, even the first play of his college career, he came in at, I believe he was still 17 at that point, against Illinois, a game that they ultimately won in 2021. He came in, and it was a 4th down and 9, where you're as a fan, you're thinking, what the heck is this guy doing, putting in a true freshman who, he had been with the team for a little bit at that point during his senior season of high school. He actually ended up leaving Owensboro High School to join the team during the fall of his senior year. And then we see this guy come out into the huddle, and we're thinking, like, what is this coaching staff thinking? I mean, he's still a kid, basically, and on 4th and 9, he completes a dart while on the run, and picks up a first down, and Rutgers ultimately won that game. So, again, much like the mobility, we haven't seen it as much because of the injuries that he's suffered, but hopefully this year fully recovered. He also has some new weapons, and we'll see how they can get on the same page. and see, if things do eventually break down, especially with an offensive line that may not has been the strength of the team recently. Um, we'll see what he can do with that. So those are his main strengths. Now we're going to talk about some of the things he needs to work on. First, I hinted at this in the first section of his arm talent, but his accuracy. He unfortunately, at least last year in the action that he showed, he has some accuracy issues, and you know, unfortunately, that kind of came to a head in many occasions last year. I mean, he against Michigan, Rutgers led 17-14 at halftime against a Michigan team that made the college football playoff, and he unfortunately threw three interceptions in the third quarter alone that really put that game away for the Wolverines. They ended up winning by 35. And it was a combination of accuracy issues along with reading the defense and, maybe sticking to his first read a little bit too much. So working on that accuracy is going to be big because if he can, not only in the short intermediate game, but if he can, drop it in the bucket in the deep game, opponents are going to have to respect the Rutgers passing game, which has not really been a factor of recent, especially in the past few years. So if he can make defenses respect the passing game, especially the deep passing game, it opens up lanes for the run game, which we've talked about. The running back room is one of the deeper rooms on the team. So if he can get that passing attack going, especially with his accuracy, then that unlocks a wealth of capabilities, not only for him but for the rest of the guys on the offense. And another thing that he struggled with is touch, and that kind of goes along with accuracy. It seems like he has an electric arm and he can make all the throws. It's just a matter of knowing when to bring back the velocity a little bit, for lack of a better term. We see that a lot in the short and intermediate game rather than the deep game. A lot of times he'll just throw a fastball to a guy, and sometimes Rutgers receivers had some drop issues last year, and a little bit of that could be attributed to the fact that Wimsatt wants to throw it as hard as he can. And so working on that's going to be big for him. Just making sure he can put it where guys can get it. And, he has that electric arm already, so that will hopefully work itself out. So it remains to be seen if he can work that out. And I know I said the out-of-structure playmaking is a strength for his, but one thing he needs to work on is definitely reading defenses in the scramble drill. I mentioned that Michigan game where he got out of the pocket and just kind of, didn't make the best decision, didn't see a cornerback, in the flat underneath, and it was an interception. I believe it was returned for a pick six, one of the three at least. So when he does get out of the pocket and he does need to go into the scramble drill and try to find a receiver, one thing that he needs to work on is, reading the defense, seeing where the coverage is headed, and making sure he makes the right throw where, he's not putting the ball in harm's way, and still setting up his team for a good play on offense. So those are all things that can be worked out. Of course, he's still young. He's a redshirt sophomore. People forget. I mean, like I said, he joined the team in the middle of his senior season of high school. So, I mean, that year you can kind of call it a wash. He played in 4 games to reserve his red shirt, and then in 2022 he dealt with some injuries here and there, and that definitely hampered his true abilities as a dual threat quarterback. So if we want to see the peak Gavin Wimsatt, we're hoping that he is fully healthy and has made strides in between his redshirt freshman and redshirt sophomore season that he's coming into this year. So that brings us into our next part of what does he need to succeed? Because obviously, football, as much as many of the other big sports, is a team sport, and a quarterback needs support from his teammates on offense in order to fully succeed. He can't do it all himself. So, what does he need to do? What does he need around him to succeed? And in my opinion, it starts at the top with simple play calling. And like I said before, offensive coordinator Kirk Schiano, he has plenty of experience coordinating offense all around. Recently was at Minnesota. That's where Rutgers hired him from, and he really helped blossom Tanner Morgan into a great Big Ten quarterback, maybe one of the best in Minnesota's history, and he did great work with the run game as well. So simple play calling, not simple that it becomes predictable, but simple as in, Wimsatt doesn't have too many reads that he has to work through, and that, it gets guys open, and that's going to be the key, is getting guys open, because getting separation for Rutgers receivers has definitely been a struggling point in the past. So getting them separation and getting them open is going to be very, very important. And this is not to say that Gavin Wimsatt is not like a smart quarterback or can't read the field or anything like that, but it just helps when you have a young quarterback, and he is still a young quarterback. When you make it easy for him by scheming up plays where guys are getting open, quickly and easily, and if his first read is open, he'll get it to him and gain some yards that way, including with the running game could open that up too. So exactly. So the one of the bigger keys is going to be the simple play calling where he can make plays and get guys open through the scheme. Now I mentioned it before, and one of the other things that he'll need is the strong running game. And I mentioned the running back room on the last episode as well, going through the two deep. I said that this is probably the deepest room on the offense, and I still do believe that. And it all starts with two guys, Sam Brown and Aaron Young, in my opinion. Sam Brown is reportedly fully healthy as training camp has already started. We're about a week in or so. He's apparently fully healthy and ready to go. So getting him on the field and getting him running is going to be huge for the Scarlet Knights offense, especially if he can show the same promise that he did in his freshman season. Now, in that Indiana game, he carried the ball, I believe it was 28 times at 105 yards and a touchdown, and unfortunately suffered the injury in that game. But even before that breakout game, he had some great moments where it just felt like he wasn't being utilized enough or properly. So, while there's still going to be some rotation in the running back room because there's a lot of guys that can effectively carry the ball, he's going to be that main bell cow back. Now, he probably won't be carrying it 25 times a game, especially coming off an injury like he had. But he will be the focal point of that running game, and getting that running game going is going to be extremely important for the quarterback's success, especially in Wimsatt's case, as he is, like I said, that dual threat quarterback. So opening up the run game where, maybe even he's the one running the ball. Now, hopefully we see some designed runs because he's still a great athlete and a great runner. So we'll see how that goes, especially in a strong running game. I said this before, opening up the deep passing game can open up the rest of the offense. It's the same with the running game. A strong running game can really open up the pass offense because the defense, if they try to stack the box against the run game, that opens up the passing game. But if they try to, play, heavy coverage on the passing game, then that opens up a lot of lanes on the running game. So it really is complementary. I know it's a cliche at this point, but it's going to be very important to play complementary football between the running game and the passing game. And Wimsatt has the ability and the potential to do both, so that's going to be very important. Now, focusing more towards just the passing game, he's going to need to build a rapport with his new targets. Those three targets we talked about in the last episode, them being Nazim Brantley, Jaquay Jackson, and Sean Bauman, they all transferred up from lower levels, so that's going to add a little bit of an extra adjustment period needed. But getting on the same page with those guys, along with the guys that were already there, Chris Long, Christian Dremel, Rashad Rochelle, those guys, getting into a strong rapport with all of his targets is going to be very, very important because, so he knows their tendencies, they know his tendencies, some of the best guys at getting out of structure, guys like prime Russell Wilson, I'm sure they worked on the scramble drill all the time where it's like, he makes one move in one motion, say, and the receivers know exactly where to go, know where he'll be, and where the ball will go. So it's going to be very important to get on the same page with those guys and see, how he can gel with them because this is a big year for him and also all the guys that are transferring in. They're all seniors, so this is their last chance to really make an impact on the college level before pursuing any kind of professional career. Jaquay Jackson at training camp said, I want to prove to people that I can make it in the pros. And I'm sure all those guys, Brantley and Bauman as well, are thinking that same thing. And the best way to do that is to get on the same page with your quarterback. So that's going to be very, very important. And then one of the other important aspects will be a strong offensive line, consistent offensive line. They brought in a new coach, Pat Flaherty, legendary, has been all over the globe in terms of coaching offensive line and tight ends. They brought back 3 starters. They're replacing a couple of them, including J.D. DeRenzo, who was their best offensive lineman last year, and Willie Tyler, their left tackle. So replacing your best offensive lineman and your blindside protector, especially when they are 2 different linemen, is very important. So we'll see how that goes. I do have confidence in what Flaherty can bring to the offensive line and how it will progress under him. So that's going to be very important to give him lanes, give him time to get rid of the ball, and as well as working with the running game, you know, opening up holes for the run game, not only for the running backs but for himself as well. So those are the things that are going to be very important for Gavin Wimsatt to get together by the time the season rolls around, which is in about 3 weeks from now. So we went through his strengths, things he needs to work on, what he needs around him to succeed, and so Gavin Wimsatt is your starting quarterback for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Now, I said that Coach Greg Schiano announced this before Big Ten Media Day. That was about a couple weeks ago, and they also sent 3 player representatives, them being Johnny Langan, Aaron Lewis, and Deion Jennings. And quite possibly the biggest star of not just Rutgers representatives, but the entire Big Ten Media Day as a whole was Aaron Lewis. I mean, he showed off his infectious personality in so many aspects, and a lot of people came away thinking like this guy has a future in TV. After his pro career, of course, because the way he's been playing and the way his potential is headed, he could have a pretty long one. But yeah, he might have been the star of the show for the entire conference. But of course, Coach Schiano spoke at Media Day. I'll give his general statement, just summarize it. Don't want to read the whole thing because I'm sure you can Google it and you don't want to hear me drone on about what Greg Schiano said when you can just read it yourself. So I'm just going to go through some of the big points and what they mean pretty much, other than just, regular coach speak, which all 14 coaches did. It is what it is. But yeah, he first, welcomed the new commissioner, Tony Petitti. Big stuff, of course. Which we'll get to later on with realignment and all that. Really fun to work with. He is, looking out for what's best for the conference. Very important. And he said, one thing that really stuck out to me, what he said was, he is the most excited or the most proud he's ever been to be at Rutgers University, which is very high praise, especially considering some of the highest of the highs that he has reached as the head coach at Rutgers. Taking down Louisville and reaching a top 10 team in the country and all that. So he said he considered it an honor and a privilege to represent Rutgers, shouting out President Holloway, Athletic Director Pat Hobbs, and then talking about, the guys that they brought with them. Like I said, Deion Jennings, the senior linebacker, 6th year, really special player. Aaron Lewis, the Energizer Bunny. I'm sure all the fans saw that too, especially in the with him talking to everyone else. And then Johnny Langan, coming back once again, his 5th year at Rutgers. And yeah, he said just a super young man, Johnny offense. And another line that really stuck out to me was, as a head coach, when your best players are your hardest workers, that is a really nice spot to be in. And I definitely agree with that. I mean, it may sound a little bit cliche, but when those guys that are setting an example in the locker room and on the field as, those guys that really put in the work and they are your best players, it really builds confidence for some of those younger guys that are looking to build into becoming an impact player. If I work as hard as they do and I can make it to where they are now, that gives me a path to success. And, I agree with Schiano. That's a huge part. So he said, it's his 15th year at Rutgers, 11 his first time, going on his 4th. And like I said, he has never been more excited to be the head coach at Rutgers University. Not only just with on the field, he mentioned the culture that they're building. He loves his players and his coaching staff. He's really excited about the way that they're handling on and off the field business, and especially with what they're doing in the classroom. Especially the first time around, that was something that Coach Schiano really emphasized as being, not just great athletes but great student athletes, and that definitely showed to have its benefits, because that is the reason that they made a bowl game in 2021, because they had the highest APR of all the 5 and 7 teams that replaced Texas A&M in the Gator Bowl. So, very important. They had over a 3.0 GPA as a collective team, and that's something that he's very proud of and very important to him. And he's talked a lot. He's always brought this up. Talked a lot about how important it is when parents trust him and the rest of his coaching staff with their sons, how important it is to not only build them to be great football players, but great people. And I'm glad that he is still emphasizing that and bringing it up as a talking point for why he's very proud of where his program is now. Um, and he said, I always tell families when they come on visits, other than the time when you're an infant, I think the biggest time of development is in your life is when you're 18 to 20 years old, 18 to 22 years old, excuse me. And I think he's definitely spot on with that as someone who is in that age range, 21 right now. And I think, I think he made a lot of good points about more off the field stuff as well. Um, so now he's getting back to more on-field stuff. He's talking about recruiting. We're a developmental program, um, and people don't always understand what that means. And he's I think he's being realistic there when it's not snap of the finger rebuild and you're a winning team. It's building a culture and building guys that are ready to compete in the Big Ten, and he said that already. Um, so he's building, and he's really trying to build up that culture, and you know, yeah, it's his opening statement was definitely a lot, a lot of different topics, but then we got to the Q&A part of it. Um, he was asked about 2024 with the elimination of divisions and the addition of USC and UCLA. Now, of course, that's out of date because they're also in 2024 welcoming Oregon and Washington. But of course, the day that the media day was, that was not even a thing yet. This has only come to be in the last couple days. But anyways, he was asked, about what he thinks about USC and UCLA coming in. He said, 23 is what I'm focused on, regular stuff like that. He said, getting a look at it didn't really change much for us in regards to the schedule for 2024, so it's not going to be anything different. Moving forward, you sure it will be, but don't worry about that when the time comes. Again, worried about the 2023 season because that's what's upcoming. Don't want to look too far ahead, but that 2024 schedule, to get a little off topic here, is not too pretty. I'm sure it'll be revised because of the new teams that are coming in. But as it stands right now, Rutgers' conference schedule is projected to have the entire Big Ten East, except for Indiana, and you're replacing Indiana with UCLA. So the Big Ten was not too kind, but we'll see if that gets a revision with the addition of Oregon and Washington, which we'll get to in a couple days, depending on when you're watching this. It may already be out now when we're talking about realignment. But anyways, back to Media Day. He was asked, when you came to Rutgers, there was a 15-game losing streak that the program had against Big Ten competition. What was something that you needed to change within the program, whether it was mindset or development, to become competitive in the Big Ten? He tried to he was definitely very introspective with this answer, saying it's a little different in our situation because he had already been there 11 years before. He had left and then he'd been away for 8 years. He said he was a little bit shocked with how much things had changed. Not even just talking about the athletes of the football, because they were in the Big East last time Schiano was there. Now they're in the Big Ten, so obviously that's going to change. But overall, just his team infrastructure as a whole, he said he had to rebuild a lot of things, things like nutrition, training, strength and conditioning. He said didn't complain at all because when you're taking a job, you know what has to get done. And coming off the previous regime, there was definitely a big rebuild needed. And, he's in the middle of that. We'll see how it goes. He says, we're in a great place right now. I think our support for our student athletes is unparalleled in college football. He's proud to say that. And he said it's one of the reasons that our guys are staying put. Rutgers really didn't lose a lot of impact guys to the transfer portal, even though there are rumblings that there were some guys that were tampered with. Given this is college athletics now, it's going to happen. But he's, the proof is on paper. They're bringing back a majority of the impact players from last year, save for those that ran out of eligibility, went to the NFL. They really didn't lose anyone of great impact to the transfer portal. So, that just shows the build that they're taking and how people and players believe in it. And he was asked another interesting question. What's one thing that he would change about the current NIL or transfer portal landscape if he could do it tomorrow? And he said that there's a lot of things, so choosing one is the tough part. But he had a very interesting answer to this one. He's kind of brought this up a couple of times. He said somehow if the universities could control more of the NIL, so there's just uniformity, you don't have all the third parties, And one thing that he's brought up in the past is, bringing up some kind of players' union, where, they become some kind of employee to whether it's the school or the state or something like that. That way it's more, regulated, and, there's nothing like what we're seeing right now with basically the wild, wild west with the transfer portal and NIL and, you know, things like that. It's been a very interesting thing because it's something that Schiano has always, even way back when in his first time around here, when NIL laws were still, just a lawsuit and a half with, Ed O'Bannon and all that fun stuff. It's always something that he has advocated for, especially in terms of getting players to unionize, and we kind of saw that with Northwestern. It eventually ended up not really going too far, but that's something that he's been proposing for a long time, and it's interesting to see how it is now and how it could change in the future. He said, bringing it in house could be important, and yeah, that was one of his more interesting and like answers of substance that we saw from him. So I was very intrigued by that. I'm sure everyone else was too. I talked about being different. The person who asked was curious, what's the biggest challenge he still faces at Rutgers? He said, number one, the biggest challenge, look at the logos on the wall. It's pretty self-explanatory. The Big Ten, especially the Big Ten East, is an absolute gauntlet, and, you're building up your entire program just to compete with those guys. The Michigans and the Ohio States and the Penn States, that's the big three right there. College football playoff contenders every single year. So, I mean, you got to get to those to see, how you can compete in the Big Ten East. And next, he was asked about Week 1 against Northwestern. Obviously, we saw how that went. Pat Fitzgerald is no longer the head coach. David Braun is the interim head coach. 6 months ago, he was a defensive coordinator at FCS North Dakota State, and now he's the head coach at a Northwestern program that is, I guess you could say, not had the best the last couple of months. So he was asked how his preparation will change in preparation for that Northwestern matchup as they come to Piscataway. He said, he didn't think as much maybe as if it was a total overhaul. He mentioned, some similarities defensively that we saw. David Braun was brought in to be the defensive coordinator, and, maybe he runs something similar to what we saw in the past few years before Braun was there. So he said, I think we're going to get what we're studying and getting prepared for. He said, the biggest thing in my career is to make sure your own team is ready. That's our challenge. And he said, you've got to make sure that Rutgers is ready on the 3rd because Northwestern definitely will be. So that will be a very intriguing matchup to see how that goes. Pretty much a litmus test for the season. And then he was asked, he had a lot of local kids to stay, help lead the program at his first tenure. How important is it to keep those kids from schools like Don Bosco and Bergen Catholic in-state to help grow the program? They just got a commit from Bergen Catholic not too long ago in Kaj Sanders, the defensive back. So, pretty topical question. And he said it's always important to recruit your backyard. New Jersey is one of the most fertile states. This is my own words. New Jersey is one of the most fertile states in athletics. So it's important to keep those guys home. And Schiano said the most important thing is that you get the right players that fit your culture and that are gifted enough to play and compete and win in the Big Ten Conference. So we're starting to see that with his recruiting vision as well. Maybe not going after some of the New Jersey guys, or maybe not pushing them as much as, maybe some other states. If you look at that 2024 class, we looked at it, back in the first episode, they're coming from all over the place. So he said, it wasn't cool to go back to Rutgers in 2021, and then 2022 we recruited all over the place to get the right guys to fit our program, and he's still doing that now. And he said, I feel confident that in our local area, the New Jersey, New York area, we're consistently going to recruit the best players, and is in our own backyard. And he said, we're not going to get them all, and that's just an unfortunate reality. You're not going to get all the best guys because, sometimes it's not even your own program. Sometimes guys just want to go elsewhere. Sometimes they feel like they fit better elsewhere. So that's just the way it is. And Schiano also said that he got a quote from Coach Joe Paterno back when he was at Penn State. Schiano was at Penn State back in the 90s. He said, don't worry about the ones you don't get. Make sure you love the ones you do get. And I think that's a great quote to live by from a recruiting sense. Can't worry about the ones that slipped away for whatever reason. You just got to worry about the ones that you do get and make sure that they are the best possible fit for your program. So the last question he was asked about offense coordinator Kirk Schiano and what he brings to the program, what kind of differences he hopes to see in the offense. And he said Schiano is a veteran coach, one that he knows very well. He's been at Rutgers before. And he said that, he was at Rutgers on our staff the first go round. He said he brings experience, clarity, and knows exactly what he wants to do. And Schiano said, I think he does a great job leading and managing our staff, and he's excited. So we talked a lot about, how he's going to work with Gavin Wimsatt as the starting quarterback. And I think from what, has been coming out from Schiano or Schiano or Wimsatt, they've worked very well together. He's learned a lot. Wimsatt mentioned, in training camp, and we'll get a little bit more into that later in the next episode. He said that he's helped to work with his mechanics a lot, so that's going to be very interesting to see how this works out. Another note that he said that kind of stuck out to me. He said it's the best staff I've been on my whole career, with the coordinators being Coach Joe Harris-Amiak and Kirk Schiano, both from Minnesota, ironically enough, but. Yeah, I mean, those are two very high-level coordinators, and Harris-Amiak led one of the better defensive units in the Big Ten last year. And he said, thank goodness, because a lot of my time is now spent on NIL and those types of things that have very little to do with offense or defense. So I think in this day and age, it's the most important to have a staff around you that you can trust with the players while you can handle, you can still handle the players as the head coach and all that kind of thing. But also, make sure you can handle some of the outside stuff as well. So, yeah, it's pretty much a summary of what, Greg Schiano said at Big Ten Media Days, and that Gavin Wimsatt is the starting quarterback. So that's about all we have for this episode. I want to thank everyone for listening.